This is something that I think is really important. I think we concentrate on the terrestrial plants very much, and that's important. But our aquatic plant species and trying to control these invasives is really terrible. And the problem with these is that a lot of people will take their aquarium and just dump it.
Right.
And not think about...
Or even if they say, well, I've got a duck pond in my backyard,
right.
I'm going to put this plant in my tiny little 4-foot pool.
Right.
It won't do any harm until a duck actually picks some up and carries it into our natural water bodies.
Exactly.
So this is where we really get into the weeds.
Welcome to Planting Pinellas, the podcast that digs deep into the heart of gardening in Pinellas County. Presented by Master Gardener volunteers of the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. I'm Charlotte Vaughn.
I'm Alan Shapiro. Whether you're a local looking to connect with your community or a visitor curious about your area's culture, conservation, and all things green, this is the place for you.
Join us as we explore the people, places, projects, and of course plants that make Pinellas a thriving hub of sustainability, innovation, and natural beauty. From gardening tips to environmental initiatives, we've got the roots of Pinellas covered. So grab your gardening gloves and let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Planting Pinellas podcast. This is officially our 1-year anniversary of the Planting Pinellas podcast. It seems a long time ago, and yet it's flown by. They always say that, but you just always feel this kind of time warp when things are...
Yeah, you do.
Especially when they're going well. It's been great.
It's been great. It's been so fantastic working with you and having this podcast and giving this information to our listeners.
Absolutely, because our goal from the start has been to reach more of our area with the same information and programming that the UF-IFAS extension in Largo is trying to reach our whole community, going out on a digital format. It just makes it more accessible where you can literally put in your earbuds and go out in your garden and listen to us. But don't forget to come back inside and leave us a comment or a review or stars or whatever
we would love to have more comments and more reviews about our podcast.
And people sharing it as well. And something I wanted to mention is we have the IFAS extension, and I want to get the name right here, UF space IFAS space extension Pinellas County is a Facebook page where we always post through our social media team and the Master Gardeners when a new episode is live on your favorite streaming platform, so that if you use Apple, Spotify, Amazon, whatever your podcast platform is, then you can go out and look for it. The Spotify links are more conveniently shareable for us, but we are on so many different platforms. I've lost count because it just pushes out through a feed. But if you follow that page, that's another spot where you can interact with the podcast, leave us comments, questions there, share the link when it comes up so that more people in our gardening community can find out about what we're doing here on the Planting Pinellas podcast and just get to know the Extension Office and the Master Gardeners program that much more.
So being that it's been a year, this is actually our 13th episode.
Uh-oh. And some people are really superstitious. Are you superstitious?
Sometimes, a little bit.
So 13 is generally thought of as an unlucky number. So I'll get into my train of thought a little bit here is we have some unlucky finds in our gardens sometimes. So I'm really wanted to focus today on the aliens, the invaders, the things that we don't want, and the terminology that we use for that brings in a lot of different words, but a big one that you'll see over and over is invasive. And invasive species, whether it's a plant, an insect, some other kind of wildlife, there's some clear-cut definitions for that.
Yes. And so some of those definitions are really important. One of them, we talked about native. So a native species would be one that's naturally occurring. And again, there's some definitions about what native would be.
It's generally thought before people from other continents really influenced this continent very much. So a native plant is considered typically before the...
Then you have nuisance plants. So what's a nuisance plant?
So that really gets into where you draw the line of what is harmful or not. Because if something is an invasive plant, we're considering it as a species that is not native to the area where it's found. It becomes established and it causes harm. This can be to the environment, to the economy, or even to human health. So environmental harm can crowd out native species. It can disrupt food webs, even just competing for resources like sunlight and water and the nutrients in the soil, that it's impacting the environment in such a way that the beneficial native plants and other species struggle to survive in their home turf. And then economic harm, if we're having to manage those species, then you get into conservation efforts and removal efforts and even the disease that it will cause to our crops and to our beneficial things.
And one of the numbers that I've in researching for this, $45 million a year is spent in the state of Florida for removal of invasive species.
And on top of that, agricultural industry loses an estimated $179 million annually because of invasive plants and the diseases and the animals that come into the beneficial crops because of these other species.
And then another interesting statistic is that non-native plants have impacted over 1.7 million acres, according to the Florida Fish and Wildlife. So this is something that's big.
They can cause health risk to humans, that many of these invasive species are toxic or have extreme irritants in their sap. We know some of the favorite ones that we love to hate, that they have a saponin or a latex in their sap that causes damage to your skin if you touch it. Some are even highly acidic. Many of them pose dangers if you accidentally consume them or if animals accidentally consume them, whether it's your pets or a wild animal, that it can cause illness and even death in people and pets. So this stuff is bad news.
This stuff is bad news. It really is. And so the other thing I think that's important to realize is that, and this is an interesting statement, all invasive species are non-native.
Yes.
We know that. But all non-natives are not invasive.
Right, exactly. So you can have an introduced plant that is neutral or is even beneficial. And you can have cultivars and nativars, which is a whole other topic we can get into one day, that they have a purpose and a place and they're okay. They're not hurting anything. When it crosses the line is when it starts to cause harm, when it is disrupting a local ecosystem or causing damage to people and property.
So how do we know when it crosses? Are there organizations that have made this determination? And if they've made this determination, what is this?
Well, there's a really interesting organization that has done an amazing amount of research and put out some really great resources, and it's called the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, otherwise known as IFAS.
You're kidding me.
No, right? Okay, so we're being a little bit snarky here.
Yeah, we are.
But there is so much information available, and they work in partnership with other agencies, the Florida Native Species Council, as well as the Florida Invasive Species Council. And that is what we sometimes hear referred to as FISC, F-I-S-C. Florida Invasive Species Council. Their website is floridainvasives.org. We will, as always, link that in the show notes. But they have an incredible database where they break things down into possible concern. They have a watch list, or a to be watched list was the old name for that, where they're looking at things that maybe in other areas with similar climates that those things got out of hand, or that there's the potential that we don't know what impact it's going to have. So they're just keeping an eye on it.
So it's possible that some kind of plant species that is up north, for example, not in Florida, but up in the northern regions is fine. But somehow it comes down here. And because we are just a wonderful hotspot because of our weather, climate is so conducive, it could get out of hand.
Yeah, and examples of that can even cross into not just the watch list, but the ones that have been analyzed as invasive, where things like Lantana camara have a susceptibility to cold, where in more northern regions, even in Georgia, that it dies back, it doesn't spread as aggressively. It is managed more in the cooler climates, but in the subtropical and tropical kind of climates, it doesn't die back. And those fruits that it produces will sprout out more easily and spread and take over.
And the common name that's the tropical. No, I'm sorry. Let's trim that.
So that one is just known as lantana.
It's lantana, but there is some native lantana.
Right, exactly. And those are fine. Those we can grow, and you generally can tell them apart with the lantana camara has the multiple colors all in one umbel of flowers.
Right.
So if you have that classic yellow, orange, and red combination, that's going to be the invasive one. If you have one that's all yellow or all purple, that it might be a safe species, but make sure that you're getting it from a reputable grower so that they have done the proper research, that they know that it is a species that grows well here.
So you just opened up a little Pandora box with big box stores.
Yes.
And what happens in big box stores. And I think I think from my perspective, it goes back to some research, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where going out to the sites, going out to IFAS, going out to the FIS sites and looking for these things before you go out and buy, because some of these are probably at the big box stores.
And some of that goes back to terminology as well, because people say, well, if they're selling it in my area, how can it be this dangerous plant? And we have levels of invasive species that are actually prohibited by law to be transported into Florida or sold in Florida. But that doesn't stop somebody from going on a trip themselves and bringing it back without going through those proper channels of the agricultural services. And it can still be introduced. It can sometimes be introduced accidentally, either through wildlife carrying a seed or something sticking to a traveling body like an animal or a vehicle. So there are ways that these plants can still get here, but the ones that are in the stores are not at the level where they're considered prohibited. And some examples that we could say of that are the melaleuca, the Brazilian pepper, that those are so bad that everybody recognizes how bad they are.
They're not sold.
And they're not allowed to be sold.
Not allowed to be sold.
There are criminal ramifications if you knowingly bring that and plant it and sell it and transfer it here.
So if we take a step back, we can look at the categories. So there are really two categories. So we talked about the watch list,
right,
in terms of ones that may be potential, but then we also have two categories of invasive species. A category one, like the melaleuca, like the Brazilian pepper, like rosary pea. A lot of these are considered prohibited. They should not be used. They're really, really disruptive. And then there's category two. So category two species is one that is, I guess it's off of the watch list and it's considered an invasive, but it hasn't gone and disrupted the ecosystems to the extent that the category one has.
But even unfortunately, some of the category one plants are still sold in regular stores. Mexican petunia is a very common one. It is a category one invasive species in all of Florida, north, central, south, all of Florida. It's considered invasive, highly invasive, damaging to the environment and the economy. And yet it's constantly in the stores. So why is that allowed? Because it's not reached the level of the prohibited species. But IFAS very strongly does not recommend planting that and does recommend removing it if you have. But good luck.
I was going to say,
because it's so hard to get rid of.
It's very difficult to get rid of.
And that was kind of part of its charm when it was first introduced. That, how some of these plants got here is because they're very hardy, because they can handle anything, including herbicides and, hand pulling and all the efforts that you have to go through to try to get rid of them, that they're very resilient against all of those things.
And they grow quickly.
Yeah.
Like the oyster plant. I mean, so it grows quickly and people like that. And it's like, this is pretty. This is beautiful. Because I don't want to step on anybody's toes in a way.
We have to.
But a lot of people who get plants, they don't think about being patient. Let me put it that way. And when you're dealing with plants, you have to be patient. You plant them and you nourish them, you water them, you fertilize them, you do all that stuff, and they will grow. But it will take some time.
So are you saying that these invasive plants may spread quicker than others?
I will.
Okay.
They will probably spread much quicker. And then if your neighbor doesn't have the Mexican petunia in their yard, they may have it soon, or an oyster plant. And that, I think, is the issue from my perspective again.
And another one, and I had to look up the pronunciation of this. I always heard it said clancho, but apparently it's supposed to be Kalanchoe hotaniae, and that is commonly known as the mother of millions
Oh,
plant.
goodness gracious.
And that's one where you
Succulent.
mentioned it is a succulent and it produces plantlets along the margins of the leaves where a single plant will reproduce itself exponentially into the millions because every single leaf has a dozen or several dozen plantlets grow off of that leaf. As soon as they touch the soil, you have another new plant. And we're dealing with a property purchase where it is infested with that plant. It's coming up through cracks in the concrete. It is all over the place. And so we're going to have to put some serious work into removing that and carefully trapping all of those little plantlets so that it doesn't get away. But I will say that when we've had some major storms in the past, that somebody in my neighborhood, maybe 6 houses down the street from me, has a patch of these growing around their mailbox. They have some really cool looking flowers. They're an interesting looking plant if you don't see them as harmful, but they showed up in my yard after a major wind event storm that we had a couple years ago. And so I was able to identify them quickly and stay ahead of the removal. And so I haven't seen them in a while, but
It's not easy.
I got some other invasives in that
Yeah.
same event. And so it's a matter of, I live right next to a very large natural space in one of our county parks. And I've seen invasive species in there recently, and the Brazilian pepper and others that are taking over these natural spaces that we're trying to preserve. So again, we're coming into resources that are literally coming out of our pockets of mitigation and removal and trying to stay ahead of it. And it's just so bad, it's kind of impossible to stay ahead of it anymore.
And I think that's one of the things that we really need to talk about is, okay, so how do we remove these? How do we get rid of these? How do you remove invasive species? And IFAS has, and we'll put this up there on our notes, a little fact sheet on clean out the invasives. And it's just 3 simple steps, just 3. Research, remove, and replace. It's real simple. And I'm being a little facetious.
Sure, yeah.
But the research part is easy to do. So,
Sites like FISC or IFAS that give those plant assessments and list the characteristics that make them harmful.
and if you're not sure, take a picture or bring a plant over to the help desk, or you can go ahead and send an email to the garden help at the extension, and we will be able to identify that. And if we can't identify that, we will then send it up to UF, and we can get that identified for you to let you know that, yes, you have an invasive species, and that's part of the research.
Right. And if you're purchasing a plant, my favorite app is Florida Friendly Plant List.
Yeah.
Because if you search for it in that list, you set it based on your zip code. If it doesn't show up, either it's not an appropriate plant for our zone or it may be invasive in our area. And so it's not considered Florida friendly because it's not recommended to grow it here.
So the second step, remove. That's the easy part.
I wish.
And as you just talked about the mother of millions,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of them at the Florida Botanical Gardens. I work there on a regular basis, and we removed a whole slew of them last year.
And you'll remove more this year.
And they're still
and
there.
next year.
And next year, and
Yeah.
the next year, and the next year. So it's not an easy thing necessarily to be able to remove the species. But
Which is why it's so important not to introduce them, but when they're already here, then dealing with them appropriately and being consistent. Because the sooner that you can stop a plant from spreading, and in the case of that mother of millions, it's not only through tissue propagation like the roots and the leaves that can resprout because they are succulent. Those plantlets already have a natural root system built into them. And then the flowers can produce seeds as well, just like a typical plant would do. And so if you have even just a weed in your garden, if you let it flower and go to seed, then I've heard it said that you can count on fighting that weed for a minimum of 7 years
Wow.
once it has set seed, because some of the seeds will stay dormant across multiple years in certain species. And so even if you remove all of them this year and remove some remnants next year, you're probably still going to have some of those dormant seeds that may sprout up in future.
So one of the things we always talk about at the end of our shows is what to do in maintenance. So you should be looking at your yard, seeing what's there. I know I've had a number of times where I've looked in my hibiscus and I would, whoop, there's a Brazilian pepper. And I pull it out, and that's not going to go. Because if you don't know that and it grows and then it goes to seed.
Right. But then the last step of what you said of replacing.
Yes.
Because it's not just about, I had to take this plant out, I'll buy a new plant to make myself feel better. Open ground is an open invitation. That if you have blank space in your garden, that those seeds are going to be able to easily set their roots and establish themselves and produce these plants that will then reproduce themselves. So keeping your ground covered somehow. And we've talked about mulch, and we've talked about ground cover plants. We've talked about turf, and we've talked about turf grass alternatives, but anything that you can do to cover your ground. And again, going back to the mulch episode, we don't necessarily recommend rocks, but there's other reasons for that you can go back to that episode in here. But for our purposes today, that if you focus on filling in your ground with things that you want, and whether it's just mulch or whether it is different kinds of plants, that the more that you are keeping your ground cultivated with good things, the less room that these invasives and weeds and other things can come in and find a spot to take a hold of.
And if you're doing your little part, that's important for for the rest of the neighborhood. And then you act as an example for your neighbors. And what do you got there? This is really pretty. And then you can talk about what you have and have a nice conversation with them, and look at their yard and make sure that there's no invasives, and talk about how to replace them. One of the sites that I found that was really interesting is the Florida Wildlife Foundation. It has this site for invasive plants in Florida, but what it does is it shows an invasive and then it shows native alternatives. So for example, it had lantana, and the native alternative is the coastal mock vervainum or firebush, for example. So in other words, you don't have to take something out and think I don't have to have something else that's in there that's going to be just as beautiful and just as pretty, but it's going to help the environment. It's going to help your yard. It's going to help wildlife.
Yeah, and the Florida Master Gardeners social media pages will often post some infographics that will say, plant this, not that. And so those are really interesting to look into, some of the replacement and swap out kind of options.
So one of the things when it comes to remove is we talked about integrated pest management many times, and go back and listen to that episode at some point. But in some of the cases, when it comes to some of the more aggressive invasives, an herbicide may have to be used, but it should be targeted.
Right, and following the label instructions. Label is the law is one of our previous episodes, but using it appropriately, using it at the right time for the right plant, that you're following the instructions.
But there's another thing when it comes to like Australian pine, for example, if you have that in your yard, with some of these species, you really should get a certified arborist.
Right, if it's a tree, you're going to have some help to get that removed appropriately, and making sure that it's identified as a problem species, that a lot of times the permitting is either an exemption or some other process if you have to remove something that is bad for our environment anyway.
And I hate to say it may be sometimes costly. So when it comes to, as we talked about, if you can do some maintenance and try to, as you did with the Mother of Millions, identify it and try to mitigate that before it gets out of hand.
Camphor tree is a good example of that, where I found one that was 3 feet tall, and it took a lot of effort to dig out the deep roots that it already had. But I was able to do that myself, versus my neighbor that it possibly came from is going to have to pay somebody to remove a tree that's 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
Staying ahead of it, it makes a big difference. And removing a few things and removing them before they begin to propagate and multiply themselves, it's all going to help you save yourself a lot of trouble and be able to enjoy your garden more.
And so going through this whole process, I think is important because it's going to benefit everybody. It's going to benefit our community. It's going to benefit the wildlife. It's going to be an important thing. So that's why you do this. Sounds like it's extra work, but it's not, because if you go and look at certain areas, even in our parks where Brazilian pepper has taken over, there is nothing growing under that.
Yeah.
It is a monoculture, and it's just so terrible. And
I think we've talked about this in some other episodes, like last month, where dealing with plants that excrete chemicals such as the jugalone and other things, where it will kill off its competition, and that really damages and disrupts a lot of the native ecosystems that we're trying to protect and conserve.
Right. And our native plants have been adapted to our environment. They've adapted to our humidity and our warmth.
And many of our native animal species are adapted to finding their food sources or their nesting sites in these native plants as well.
Correct. And so that's another thing we didn't even get into, but that's another whole episode on, if you want to talk about wildlife. But it's just an important thing for everybody in our community to step up and to do that, and to make sure when you go to these big box stores to do your research. I mean, not all the plants there are terrible.
But not all of them are good either.
Not all of them are good either. And you really need to do the research to find out and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us into our wrap up for every episode, which is the Ready, Set, Grow. So talking about what we should do to get our
I want
gardens
to say
ready.
one thing.
Okay.
I know it's spring and it's much warmer here because our wonderful live oaks and all of our oaks are blooming. And I have allergies, and it's wonderful. Spring is here, so there's a lot of things that we need to do.
Yeah, so cleaning up a lot of things is good timing. We had some fairly significant cold weather recently, and generally Pinellas County is considered that it doesn't freeze, or that it's very rare for us to get a freeze or even frost, but we can still get cold damage on some of our tropical and subtropical plants that just can't handle even 40 or 50 degrees and below. So you don't want to cut those back too soon, but we are past the point now where it's generally mid-February.
I think it's February 15th.
Around or
February
after
15th.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
That wait until that time frame before you start to prune and clean up. But hey, it's go time now. Go ahead and get out there, do some seasonal pruning, shaping, looking for those things. We're going to do an episode on pruning in the future, but there's a lot of good resources that you can find on IFAS.
Where can they find them?
IFAS on our website, the UFL, and all of that is in the show notes as always.
Yeah.
And so I say it every time, but it matters. Irrigation maintenance. And specifically, I want to issue another reminder that we are under severe drought conditions right now, and the Southwest Florida Water Management District has issued a more strict irrigation schedule where it's a maximum of 1 day per week. And which day it is varies based on where you live. The resources to find your watering day, I think knowyourday.org is through the Tampa Bay Water, or just look up the Tampa Bay Water website, and you can put in your address and find out either by your zip code or by your specific home address of exactly when and how often you're allowed to water. And remembering that local municipalities can apply a stricter control, but they can't make it any more lenient.
So I see the watering schedule for Pinellas County is up there, but the individual municipalities may have a little more stricter.
Right. So if you live in a city limits, make sure that you check your city limits as well as your city website. But in general, if you at least go by that SWFWMD restriction, that's a good place to start. So monitoring your irrigation, making sure that there's no leaks, that everything is functioning correctly.
And what about mulching? So this time of year would be a good time to look at your mulch and the mulch level. We go back to our episode on mulching. We mentioned that one time before, but
yeah, that moves into the set portion of this where you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah.
So putting in compost, putting in different kinds of fertilizers, we are still within the window where we can apply fertilizers appropriately, using those at this time of year if that is recommended for the product and the plant that you're applying it with. Prepping your areas, making sure that you are removing the weeds and maybe putting down some kind of a biodegradable weed barrier. I like to use the contractor's paper rolls from the hardware stores, and it will biodegrade. It has plant-based inks, if any, and it is actually considered a brown nitrogen source that it will compost into your soil and benefit your soil, but it helps you to stay ahead of the weeds. So get your gardening supplies ready. Check your products that maybe you had some leftovers from last year. See if they're expired, because even if it's a good product, if it's beyond its useful date, then it's either going to be less effective or it may potentially become harmful if it has passed its useful life.
And we don't want to talk about lawns too much. It is getting warmer.
Right.
And so lawns will start to grow. So you may want to consider monitoring your lawn if you have any turf grass and look for any weeds that are there that you may want to get rid of. But again, think about alternatives.
Right. And this is a great time.
This is a
while
great time.
It is dry, that those things are dormant, it's a little easier to remove them while they're dormant. So if you want to remove sections of turf, go for it now, because it's going to be a little bit easier than if you waited till it was in its full growing season later in the summer. So then what do we want to plant instead? So whether you're starting a turf alternative or whether you're starting an herb garden or maybe some flowers for our pollinators, there are so many things that are ready to grow right now. Coriander is the seed that comes from the cilantro plant, and mine is getting there. I've got the cilantro. I was able to harvest some of it, but I went out last night and it is in full flower and it's beautiful, but I know that I won't get any more of the leaves as harvest now. I'm just going to be collecting the seeds.
That's okay.
Parsley, tarragon, basil, lavender, lemon balm, chives, oregano, thyme, marjoram, sage, and dill. All of these things are great to plant in the spring, and many of them are perennials for us, and they will continue to grow for years to come if you get them started in the cooler weather now. You may have to protect them in the summertime with a kind of a shade cloth or growing maybe a
So they'll
vining
grow through the
plate.
summer?
They can. It depends on the site. That if you have, I'm trying loofah this year, and I just saw some sprouts last night when I was in my garden, and I have it actually growing up and over my herb patch. And so it's got a trellis to climb on, but it will provide protection for my herbs in the hot afternoon sun, because the way that the leaves spread, that they have that kind of mutually beneficial relationship. So think about things like that, whether it's a shade cloth or whatever. We'll get to that again in the summer when it gets hotter. But for right now, just being prepared for that. And then there's so many flowers that we can grow right now. The different kinds of begonias, which there are types of them that are invasive. Don't get those. But there's some really great ones.
I have the ones growing in my backyard are just beautiful right now. They're just blossoming, and they're in a pot, so they're contained.
Yeah, and Rudbeckia, Terenia, different types of sunflower, sage, the scarlet sage, as well as the herbal sage, zinnias, marigolds. Some of my marigolds are coming back. I planted some geraniums a week ago. Gazania is an interesting one. And if you haven't seen that, I think they call it the African daisy. It's got an interesting
I'm not as familiar
color
with that
pattern. I discovered it last year, and it's just a very interesting kind of plant. Those all do well in full sun. Many of them will do well in partial sun as well. But
So that goes back to right plant, right place.
for sure. And then some of the pentas, and honestly, most of the ones on the partial sun list are on the full sun list as well. And we always have the link to the monthly gardening calendars. And so that's on the flowers. On
What about vegetables?
vegetables and other things.
I think we have to be careful, though, in some of the vegetables that you start planting now, because
You check
we're getting into the
seed-
warmer months.
Yeah, check the seed to harvest dates.
Sun is a little bit more higher in the sky, more
Right.
direct here.
And remember that we act as South Florida. We act as
Right.
a tropical or subtropical climate. So really the summertime is harder to grow a lot of things unless you can use things like shade cloth
Right.
or otherwise sheltering your plants from some of the more extreme full sun. But things that you can grow directly from seed right now would be different types of beans, like lima beans, bush beans, different kinds of melons, cantaloupe, watermelon, even squash, different kinds of squash, bunching onions, radishes, okra, corn. Those you can all plant directly from seed. Some of them don't even like to be transplanted, so it's better just to direct sow them in your garden. Other kinds of squash like the Seminole pumpkins, the calabaza, those you can transplant carefully, but if you've already started to grow them or if you buy a plant that's already started, then that can speed up your growing season, getting them in the ground when they're already a few inches tall, that somebody started them in a greenhouse over the winter. It's allowing you to get to a harvest point before it gets too hot for the plant to do well. And other things that can continue over the summer, like the tropical spinach or different kinds of ginger and roselle. Even some people grow sugarcane around here. Those are things
Really?
that you can transplant easily, but they will tend to last over the summer. So it's fine to plant them now because they're going to do just fine in the heat and then still be able to harvest whatever time of year they're ready.
Sounds great. No tomatoes, right?
That's more of a North Florida thing right now. So we really don't act like North Florida, but I have tomatoes that are producing like crazy right
really?
now. And they were started in the winter. And so they got enough of a head start. But again, I grow mine under a shade structure. So I have tomatoes that have actually lasted over a year and are still producing now, that I've kept them protected from both the extreme cold and the extreme UV. So they're still producing. And I had a handful of them last night that I'm just like snacking in the garden because they're great. But it's, again, the way that you plant them, that the right plant, right place can be picking the plant that suits the conditions you have or adapting the conditions to the plant that you want. So you can grow things in a way that protects the plant a little bit more, but the more you do, the more you have to do. So just keeping in mind, am I invested in that?
Yeah.
And for fresh homegrown tomatoes, sure I am.
It depends on what you want.
It absolutely
how much
does.
you- Well, I want to thank you all for listening again, and we just appreciate everybody being here. It's been a wonderful year doing this podcast and doing these episodes. And go back and listen to some, please.
Absolutely.
Please. They're always out there. And I think the at least the first 9 that we did on the Florida Friendly Principles.
It's always going to be useful and beneficial information.
Yeah.
And I would love to see some comments from people who have been following along with us from the beginning.
Yeah.
And just kind of drop a comment on this episode and let us know maybe when you started listening or how you found us or something that has stood out to you along the way or that you've put to use in your own garden, because we really want to get your feedback and just hear more about how this podcast is impacting our local community and what we can do to benefit you even more and just to keep making Pinellas that beautiful place that we love to live.
Thanks for tuning into Planting Pinellas. We hope you're feeling inspired to get involved, learn more, and grow alongside this incredible community.
Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you like the show, leave us 5 stars or a review. And don't forget to share with fellow plant lovers. Until next time, keep planting, keep growing, and keep making Pinellas County a place to thrive.
This podcast is brought to you by the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension in Pinellas County, Florida, an equal opportunity institution.